This is Time Magazine's Bobby Ghosh. As Times correspondent in Iraq from 2003 through 2007, I saw the country evolve from a dictatorship to a nation on the brink of a civil war and finally into a democracy. A fragile and imperfect one, to be sure, but a democracy nonetheless. Now, in time for the second parliamentary elections and the 7th anniversary of the US-led invasion, I talked to a number of Iraq experts about the country's progresses and what role the United States will continue to play as its military withdraws from Iraq.
We certainly did pass through very, very turbulent and violent times. Now the situation is improved considerably.
All the basic questions that plagued Iraq before the surge are still there. How do you share oil revenue? What's the relationship between major groups? Will Iraq have a strong central government or be a loose confederation? What's the disposition of the disputed city of Kirkuk? I worry that Iraq could slide back into civil war very easily. What stopped the civil war of 2006 and 7? The surge. Americans aren't going to do it this time. So I think you want to be careful about leaving.
This month, Time is looking at how far the country has come, its security forces, its legal system, its politics, and its reconstruction. This is a scene in Baghdad from June 30th, 2009. The Iraqis were celebrating the implementation of SOFA, the Status of Forces Agreement between their government and the United States. This agreement states that the US will pull out all its troops by 2011. But while the mood was joyous, many Iraqis knew even then that they had a long road ahead of them. The outcome of the country's elections this month will be another step in determining what form the country will take. Early signs indicate that it will be a tight race and possibly a bloody one.
There has been kind of a ratcheting up of violence and some high-profile bombings. But to me, the real question is what happens after the elections. Are they perceived as free and fair? Will they allow a broadening of a national consensus to include some of the groups that were excluded in the last elections?
Hundreds of candidates are standing for elections, but the key players are familiar. There's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, former Prime Minister Iyad al-Lawi, several different Shiite and Sunni parties, Kurdish parties from the north, and new and uncertain coalitions between them. The most likely outcome is a broad coalition of parties, secular parties, sectarian parties representing the different ethnic groups. In fact, a government not unlike the one currently ruling in Baghdad. But in the end, who wins how many seats in the elections will matter less than what kind of compromise and what kind of negotiations take place between them after the vote.
The election just provides candidates for the parliament. Then there's a very lengthy process that Iraq will undergo of trying to figure out which coalitions can form a government. That will be very messy. It will probably take a very long time. But when that dust settles, we'll have a better sense of whether the main political leaders are committed to working within the political system.
Whatever government emerges, one thing is clear: Iraq will continue to need US support in one fashion or another for a long time to come.
Just because people hold up purple fingers doesn't mean the election is a success. Americans tend to equate elections with democracy. Elections are actually a consequence of democracy, but one of many. So is the rule of law, equal justice under the law. Stability.
It's very much in the interest of the United States, and certainly in our interest, that we protect this fledgling democracy against interference and stand up to that interference mutually. This is what will determine what kind of Iraq will emerge as a result of this. Is it an Iraq that will be a big credit for the United States? An Iraq that will justify all the sacrifices made by Americans in blood and treasure and all the sacrifices made by Iraqis? Or is it a failed country that will cause more hurt in the years to come? That is going to be the important question, and it is very clear where our interests lie.